On the eve of a billion-dollar merger, a cyber attack threatens everything a businessman built over 15 years. When everything seems lost, a 12-year-old girl appears out of nowhere with a tablet in her hands and an unlikely question. Can I help? In that silent dawn begins a rescue no one could have predicted, coming from someone no one would ever expect. The London night was especially cold that Wednesday in June. From the top of the 23rd floor of the corporate building in Canary Wharf, Brandon Alistair watched the city lights spread out like an infinite carpet of other people's hopes and dreams. His own dreams, however, were crumbling at that very moment. The screens around him blinked a furious red, like open wounds bleeding away his entire history of 15 years of tireless work. Brandon was 40, with greying hair at his temples, that he always thought gave his look an air of elegance and maturity. He wore an impeccable, grey suit even at that hour of the night, because he never allowed his appearance to reflect any fragility. But that night his tie was loose, the top buttons of his shirt were undone, and his hands trembled slightly as he tried for the 100th time to access the central servers of TechVision, the company he had built from scratch and which was now dying before his eyes. The cyber attack had begun around 7 in the evening, just as he was reviewing the final details of the merger with Global Tech International, a deal worth nearly £2 billion that would put TechVision on the world map of major technology corporations. Everything was planned to the millimeter. The final meeting was scheduled for the next morning, and investors had already shown enthusiasm for the numbers Brandon had presented in recent weeks. But in a matter of minutes, the entire castle came crashing down. First came the security alerts, then the blocked access. Next, essential files began to disappear like mist in the sun. Brandon summoned the entire information technology team. They came running. They tried everything, nothing worked. The attackers were professionals. They knew every loophole, every vulnerability. It was as if they had a complete map of the company's digital infrastructure. Around 10 at night, after hours of frustrated attempts, Brandon sent everyone home. It was no use. The damage was done. Now, alone in his spacious and cold office, he sank into the imported leather armchair and felt the weight of defeat crush his chest. That company was all he had. After his turbulent divorce from Miranda 3 years ago, TechVision had become his only family, his only purpose. Miranda had always complained that he loved the company more than he loved her. Perhaps she was right, and now he didn't even have the company left. He thought of his son, Gregory, who lived with his mother in a flat in Richmond and whom he saw only on alternate weekends. The 16-year-old boy looked at him with a mixture of respect and distance, as if Brandon were more of a famous executive than a father. How many times had he cancelled outings because of meetings? How many school plays had he missed because there was a product launch? Guilt was a constant companion, but Brandon had always convinced himself that he was building a legacy, a solid future for his son. But what kind of legacy was it if everything could disappear in one night? He stood up and walked to the window. Down below, the city lived its nightly routine. Cars rushed by, people returned home, apartment lights turned on and off. Life went on, indifferent to his despair. Brandon pressed his forehead against the cold glass and closed his eyes. He tried to pray, something he hadn't done since childhood, but the words wouldn't come. Only an immense emptiness. It was then that he heard it. Light, almost imperceptible footsteps echoing in the silent corridor. Brandon turned. Alert! There shouldn't be anyone on that floor at this hour. The security guards made their rounds on the lower floors, and he had sent all the employees home. Who could it be? His heart quickened. Was it someone connected to the attack? A corporate spy coming to finish the job? He left his office and walked through the empty cubicles, following the sound of the footsteps. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows between the desks and partitions, and then he saw her. A girl. She couldn't have been more than 12, 13 years old. She wore a faded pink hoodie, jeans with a tear at the knee, worn-out trainers, and carried a school backpack. In her hands, she held an old tablet, its case covered in colorful, star-shaped stickers. She walked with that typical childhood curiosity, looking at the computer screens, the pictures on the walls, the ornamental plants that the cleaning crew watered every night. When their eyes met, the girl stopped. Brandon did too. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. She had brown skin, curly hair tied back in a simple ponytail, and deep dark eyes that seemed to hold an unusual intelligence. She showed no fear, only surprise. "Who are you, little girl?" Brandon asked, trying to sound firm but unable to hide the exhaustion in his voice. The girl bit her lower lip, hesitant. "I'm Jasmine. My mum works here. She's on the cleaning staff. I always come with her because there's no one to stay with me at night. I usually stay downstairs in the canteen, doing my homework. But I finished early today and decided to have a look around. Sorry, I didn't know anyone was here." Brandon sighed. He had no energy to scold anyone. "It's all right, just go back to where your mum is, okay? This is no place for children at this hour." Jasmine nodded but didn't move. Her eyes drifted to Brandon's office, where the screen still glowed red through the glass door. "You're in trouble," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Brandon laughed humorlessly. "You could say that, but it's nothing you can help with. Now go, before your mum gets worried." The girl took a step towards the office, completely ignoring his instruction. "I know about computers," she said with a seriousness that was almost comical for someone her age. "Can I take a look?" Brandon was about to refuse. He was going to say it was ridiculous that she was just a child, that the best information security experts in London couldn't solve the problem. But something in her expression stopped him. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe the exhaustion that was eroding his ability to reason. He just shrugged and walked back into his office, followed by the small figure of Jasmine. She approached the screens with a disconcerting naturalness. She put her backpack on the floor, pulled up a chair and sat down. Her fingers began to slide across the touchscreens with familiarity. Brandon watched her, incredulous. "It's a targeted attack," she murmured, almost to herself. "Very well planned. They knew exactly where to hit." "How do you know that?" Brandon asked, now genuinely curious. Jasmine didn't take her eyes off the screen. "Because I've been studying this for years, since I got my first second-hand tablet when I was 8. I taught myself on the internet, videos, forums, tutorials. My mum thinks I just watch cartoons, but I actually spend all my time programming, testing code, learning about systems." She paused, her fingers still working. "I never had money for a course, but I had time. A lot of time while waiting for my mum to finish her shift." Brandon sat down slowly in his armchair, observing the surreal scene. A 12-year-old girl, the daughter of a cleaner, analyzing a cyber attack that had brought down his entire company. If someone had told him this story, he would have laughed at the implausibility. But there she was, focused, serious, moving data from one place to another as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "They've blocked the main access points," Jasmine said after a few minutes. "But they left a trail, they always do." She connected her own tablet to the system, typing commands that Brandon barely understood. "I'm going to try to trace the origin of the attack. If I can identify the pattern, I might find a way in." Brandon wanted to say it was impossible, that his entire team had tried and failed, but something in him, perhaps a microscopic spark of hope, preferred to just watch in silence. Jasmine worked with absolute concentration, biting the tip of her tongue as children do when they are focused. Occasionally she would murmur technical terms that Brandon vaguely recognized from meetings with the IT department. Half an hour passed, then an hour. Brandon brought her some water, which she drank without taking her eyes off the screen. He tried to understand what she was doing, but the speed at which she worked was astonishing. It was like watching a musical prodigy play the piano. There was an innate talent there, something no course could fully teach. "Found something," Jasmine said suddenly, making Brandon jump. "They attacked the main servers, but—" She paused, her eyes widening. "Do you have any old servers? Like, really old ones that nobody uses anymore?" Brandon frowned, thinking. "Yes, I think so. When the company was smaller, we had servers in the basement, but they haven't been used in years. Why?" "Because they didn't attack those," Jasmine replied, a smile starting to form on her lips. "And if they still have old system backups, we might be able to restore from them. It won't be perfect, but it could save the essential data." Brandon felt something stir in his chest. Could it be possible? He stood up quickly, almost tripping over his own anxiety. The servers are in. Saab level 2. I'll get the keys. 15 minutes later, they were in the building's basements, in a forgotten room filled with obsolete, dust-covered equipment. Jasmine examined everything with shining eyes, like an archaeologist finding lost treasures. Brandon watched her, still trying to process the surrealism of the moment. How could this girl, who appeared out of nowhere, be his only hope? She connected cables, wiped dust from old keyboards, and rebooted systems that hadn't been turned on in years. Her fingers flew over the keyboards with a dexterity that bordered on the supernatural. Brandon just watched, holding a flashlight to illuminate her work. At some point he realized he was praying again, and this time the words came. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, Jasmine let out a cry of joy that echoed through the empty basement. "I got it. The data is here. I'm starting the restoration now, but it will take a few hours." Brandon's legs felt weak. He sat on the cold concrete floor, his back against the wall, and covered his face with his hands. He didn't cry, but he came close. Jasmine continued to work, her small silhouette illuminated by the bluish glow of the old monitors. At 6 in the morning, as the first rays of sun began to tint the London sky, Jasmine announced that the restoration was complete. 80% of the data had been recovered. The main systems were back online. The company was saved. Brandon looked at her, that extraordinary girl in the pink hoodie and worn-out trainers, and for the first time in years, he felt something other than ambition or determination. He felt pure, deep, overwhelming gratitude. "How can I thank you?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. Jasmine shrugged, putting her tablet back in her backpack. "You don't have to thank me. I just helped because you looked sad, and because I like solving problems." Brandon knelt in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level. "Jasmine, what you did here today saved much more than a company. You saved the jobs of hundreds of people. You saved dreams, and I will never forget this." The girl smiled shyly. "Can I come again? I mean, if you let me. I'd love to learn more about the systems here. There's so much cool stuff." Brandon smiled for the first time in days. "Not only can you come again, but you'll have access to everything you need. I'll talk to your mother and I'll create a special program for you. You deserve the best tools, the best teachers." Jasmine hugged her tablet to her chest, her eyes shining with emotion. "Really? You'd do that for me?" "It would be an honor," Brandon replied, and it was the absolute truth. As they rode the lift back up to the main floor, side by side, Brandon thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. Last night he had been sunk in the most absolute despair. Now, he was walking alongside a miracle disguised as a little girl. Constance, Jasmine's mother, was waiting for them in the canteen, worried about not finding her daughter. When she saw the two of them step out of the lift, she ran towards them. "Jasmine, where were you? I've been looking everywhere for you." Before the girl could answer, Brandon stepped forward. "Constance, your daughter just saved my company, and I would very much like to talk to you about her future." The woman looked from one to the other, confused. Brandon began to explain, and as he spoke, he saw Constance's face change from alarm to disbelief, and then to an immense tear-filled pride. She hugged Jasmine tightly, and the girl hugged her back, whispering that it was okay, that she had just helped a friend. Brandon watched them and felt something changing inside him, something deep and essential. For 15 years, he had built a company focusing only on numbers, profits, growth. He had forgotten that behind every system, every line of code, there were people. People like Jasmine with hidden talents and guarded dreams. People like Constance, who worked every night to ensure her daughter had a better future. The meeting with Global Tech took place as scheduled. Brandon arrived tired but confident. When the foreign executives asked about the system instability detected the day before, he smiled and said that everything was resolved, that they had implemented new layers of security, and that the company was stronger than ever. He didn't mention Jasmine, not out of shame, but for protection. That girl was too special to be exposed to the corporate world at such a young age. The merger was approved, the contracts were signed. But for Brandon, that was no longer the most important thing. The most important thing was happening 3 floors below, where Jasmine was meeting the company's technology team for the first time, getting a new computer and access to the best development tools available on the market. Constance had been promoted to General Services Coordinator, with a salary that would allow her to stop working night shifts. Mother and daughter could finally have a normal routine, but Brandon knew that was just the beginning. Because that night, amidst red alerts and absolute despair, he had learned something fundamental. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, and that talent and potential have no fixed address, do not respect postcodes or illustrious surnames. They are everywhere, just waiting for an opportunity to shine. As he signed the final documents of the merger, Brandon looked out of his meeting room window and saw London stretching into the distance. That immense city, full of invisible Jasmines, hidden talents, miracles waiting to happen, and he promised himself that he would never be blind to it again, because sometimes an entire empire can be saved by a 12-year-old girl with an old tablet and a heart big enough to ask, even of a downcast stranger, if she could help. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. Let's keep going. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The weeks following the night of the attack completely transformed the routine at TechVision and the lives of everyone involved. Jasmine began to frequent the company every day after school, arriving around 2 in the afternoon and staying until the beginning of Constance's evening shift. Brandon arranged for a special room for her on the 18th floor, equipped with the best computers, multiple screens, state-of-the-art tablets, and a technical library that would make any technology professional drool with envy. The girl absorbed knowledge like a thirsty sponge. The company's engineers, initially skeptical about teaching their secrets to a child, soon surrendered to her sharp intelligence and insatiable hunger to learn. Richard Moore, the information security manager, became something of an official mentor to her. A man in his early 50s, with completely white hair and thick-rimmed glasses, Richard had 3 children and recognized in Jasmine a special spark that deserved to be nurtured. "She's extraordinary," Richard commented to Brandon one July afternoon as they watched Jasmine through the glass of the meeting room. "I've never seen anyone learn so quickly. Sometimes I forget I'm dealing with a 12-year-old girl." Brandon smiled with paternal pride. He himself had been developing a deep affection for Jasmine, different from anything he felt for his son Gregory. With the boy, there had always been that underlying tension, that emotional distance built by years of absence. With Jasmine, everything was simpler, purer. She admired him without resentment, and he could be generous without guilt. But not everything was rosy at TechVision. The merger with Global Tech had brought not only capital and prestige, but also renewed pressures and structural changes that displeased part of the old board. In particular, 2 executives had been showing growing discontent with the company's direction. Roger Forrester, the chief financial officer for 12 years, a 45-year-old man with an impeccable record and unquestionable loyalty until then, had been making acidic comments about Brandon's decisions in closed meetings. Helen Vance, vice president of operations and considered by many to be the company's number 2, also showed signs of dissatisfaction, albeit in a more subtle and calculated manner. Brandon noticed these tensions but didn't pay them much mind. Change always generated resistance. In time, everyone would adapt, or so he thought. What Brandon didn't know was that, 3 floors below, Jasmine had begun to detect something much more worrying than simple resistance to change. It all started on a rainy Thursday. Jasmine was alone in her room testing new security protocols that Richard had suggested when she noticed an anomaly in the access logs. There were administrative accesses made at odd hours, in the middle of the night when no one should have been working. She checked the building's physical security logs and confirmed that at those times only the night guards were present. Someone was accessing the system remotely, but using valid administrator credentials. At first, Jasmine thought it might be scheduled maintenance, but the more she investigated, the stranger it became. The accesses were always to the same files related to strategic projects, sensitive financial documents, and, more worryingly, to the new security layers implemented after the attack. It was as if someone was mapping the entire system again, looking for new vulnerabilities. Jasmine printed the data and took it straight to Richard. The man analyzed it all with growing attention, his brow furrowed in concern. "This isn't normal," he murmured. "I'll take it to Brandon. Good work, Jasmine." When Brandon saw the data, he felt a chill run down his spine. He called an emergency meeting with only Richard and Peter Sutton, the Chief Technology Officer. The three of them locked themselves in the executive meeting room and spent hours analyzing the access patterns. The conclusion was disturbing. Someone from within, someone with administrative access, was snooping around the company. "We need to find out who it is," Brandon said, his voice tense. "But we have to do it discreetly. If the person realizes we're investigating, they could erase their tracks or make things worse." "Leave it to me," Richard replied. "I'll set up invisible trackers. The next time this someone logs in, we'll know exactly where the connection is coming from." While this was happening in the upper echelons, Jasmine returned to her study routine, but kept a watchful eye on the systems. She had created a small monitoring dashboard for herself that alerted her to any suspicious activity. It was like a game for her, a much more interesting version of any video game. Protecting the company that had given her a chance had become her personal mission. At home, things were also changing for the Sanders family. Constance, now the General Services Coordinator, worked regular business hours and could finally have dinner with her daughter every day. They rented a better flat, still in South London, but in a safer neighbourhood with a better quality state school nearby. For the first time in years, Constance could sleep without an alarm going off in the middle of the night. For the first time, Jasmine had her own room, with a desk where she set up a veritable workstation with the equipment she had received from the company. But with the improvements came worries. Constance noticed how her daughter spent hours and hours in front of screens, how she talked incessantly about code, systems, and security. She was afraid that Jasmine was missing her childhood, that this adult world would swallow her up before her time. She tried to talk to her daughter about it one night while they were having spaghetti bolognese for dinner. "Jasmine, have you been having fun? Have you been playing with the girls from school?" The girl looked at her mother with those deep, serious eyes. "Mum, I have fun programming. It's what I love to do. The girls at school think it's weird, but that's okay. I'd 1,000 times rather be solving a coding problem than talking about soap operas." Constance sighed. She knew her daughter was different, always had been. But there was something about that difference that both worried her and filled her with pride. Jasmine was special, and the world needed special people. But the world could also be cruel to those who stood out too much. Meanwhile, at TechVision, the investigation was progressing. Richard set up sophisticated tracking systems, and in the early hours of a Tuesday morning, the alert went off. Someone was accessing the system again. This time, they managed to trace the origin. The connection came from an IP address registered to Roger Forrester, the Chief Financial Officer. Brandon didn't want to believe it. Roger had been with the company from the beginning, was one of the first employees, had helped build the financial structure that allowed TechVision to grow. But the data didn't lie. Brandon decided not to confront him directly yet. He needed more proof to understand the extent of the problem. That's when Jasmine found something even more disturbing. Rummaging through older logs, she discovered that the suspicious accesses hadn't started after the cyber attack. They had started months before. In fact, some of the vulnerabilities exploited in the attack seemed to have been deliberately left open by someone from within. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in a macabre way. The attack hadn't just been external. Someone from inside had facilitated everything. Jasmine took this discovery straight to Brandon, bursting into an important meeting with investors without caring about protocol. "He's here," she said breathlessly, placing her tablet on the mahogany table. "Whoever facilitated the attack is inside, and it started months ago." Brandon apologized to the investors and cancelled the meeting. He took Jasmine to his office and listened with growing attention and simmering anger to every detail she presented. It was no longer just unauthorized access. It was planned sabotage, premeditated betrayal. Someone had tried to destroy the company from the inside out. That night, Brandon couldn't sleep. He paced back and forth in his minimalist cold flat in Shoreditch, a space that reflected his empty personal life. He thought about calling Miranda, his ex-wife. But what for? She had already told him so many times that he only thought about the company, that he was incapable of trusting the people around him. Maybe she was right. Maybe his blind obsession with success had made him vulnerable exactly where he needed to be strongest. Who could he trust? The next morning, Brandon called a private meeting with Roger Forrester. The CFO arrived on time, as always, impeccable in his navy blue suit, a leather briefcase in hand. He greeted Brandon with the same cordial smile as always and sat in the chair opposite the desk. "Roger, we need to talk about something serious," Brandon began, studying the man's face. "We've detected unauthorized access to the system. We've traced the origin. It came from your IP." Roger's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "That must be a mistake. Maybe someone cloned my credentials. You know how these things are." "It's not a mistake," Brandon retorted, his voice gaining firmness. "And it's not just recent access. For months, you've been going through confidential files, strategic documents, and there's evidence that you may have facilitated the attack that nearly destroyed this company." The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Roger stared at him, and something in his face changed. The mask of cordiality fell, revealing something darker underneath. "You don't understand anything, Brandon. I spent 12 years building this company by your side. 12 years. And when we finally succeed, you decide to sell everything to a foreign corporation? To dilute what we built? To turn our company into just another subsidiary?" Brandon felt anger rise. The merger was the best strategic decision. You know that. "For whom, Brandon? For you, for the investors. And what about us, the ones who were here from the beginning? What do we get? Fancy titles and salaries that don't change while you sign billion-pound contracts?" Roger stood up, his hands on the desk. "I deserved more. We deserved more. So you decided to sabotage everything, to destroy what you helped build." Roger laughed, a bitter sound. "I didn't sabotage. I just opened doors for those who could value my knowledge. There are companies that would pay fortunes for TechVision's secrets. I was just securing my future, since you clearly didn't care about it." Brandon felt an overwhelming disappointment. It wasn't just professional betrayal, it was personal. He had considered Roger a friend, although they had never been close outside of work. "You're fired," he said, his voice controlled despite the storm inside. "And I will take all appropriate legal action. Get out of here now." Roger picked up his briefcase and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. "You've changed, Brandon. Or maybe you were always like this and I just didn't want to see it. So focused on growing that you forgot to look around, to value who was with you. It's no surprise even your family left you." The door closed with a definitive click. Brandon was left alone, Roger's words echoing in his mind like accusations too true to be ignored. He sank into his chair, and for the second time in a few weeks, felt the crushing weight of loneliness. But there was no time for self-pity. If Roger was only part of the problem, who else was involved? Brandon called Richard and Peter again. They needed to search everything, investigate all suspicious access, identify possible accomplices. The hunt continued. Jasmine, upon learning of the confrontation with Roger, felt a mixture of relief and concern. She was the one who had discovered the evidence. Would it be her fault if more people were fired? Richard noticed her unease and sat beside her in the small room that had become her sanctuary. "Jasmine, you did the right thing. Protecting the truth is always the right path, even when it hurts. But what if I destroy people's lives? What if they have families?" Richard sighed. "Their choices destroyed their own lives. You just brought the truth to light. Never blame yourself for that." That night, as Jasmine drove home with her mother, she looked out the car window at the lights of London and thought about how complex life was. A few weeks ago, her biggest worry was finishing her maths homework before her mother's shift ended. Now she was at the center of a corporate investigation, uncovering betrayals and secrets. It was exciting and terrifying at the same time. Back at TechVision, the investigation revealed something even more shocking. Roger had not been working alone. There was someone else involved, someone even closer to Brandon. The access patterns showed coordination between two different users, and when they traced the second set of credentials, the name that appeared made Brandon feel the floor disappear from under his feet. Helen Vance, his vice president. The woman he trusted to run the company when he was traveling. The brilliant professional everyone admired. She was involved too. Brandon didn't want to believe it, but Jasmine had set up an ingenious trap. She created a digital honeypot, a fake vulnerability in the system that only someone actively looking for loopholes would notice. And the following night, someone took the bait. Helen Vance accessed that exact vulnerable point, confirming that it wasn't just Roger acting alone. The confrontation with Helen was different. She didn't deny it, didn't get worked up. She simply admitted everything with a disturbing calm. Sitting in the same chair where Roger had been days before, she looked Brandon in the eye and spoke with brutal honesty. "Do you know what it's like to work 15 hours a day for years and see your boss get all the credit, Brandon? Do you know what it's like to be called number 2 forever, always in the shadows, always indispensable but never valued enough?" Helen crossed her legs, her posture impeccable even in defeat. "Roger approached me 6 months ago. He said there was a buyer interested in privileged information from TechVision. I hesitated at first, but then I realized I didn't care anymore. This company has drained me for years and given me crumbs in return." "I always valued you, Helen, you know that." She laughed humorlessly. "Valuing is different from recognizing, Brandon. You valued me as a useful part, not as a person. How many times did I suggest changes and you ignored them? How many times were my ideas appropriated by others in meetings? I became invisible in my own relevance." Brandon had no answer, perhaps because deep down he knew there was truth in those words. He had built an empire, but at what cost? How many people had he hurt along the way without realizing it? How many Helens and Rogers had he created with his ambitious blindness? In the days that followed, TechVision underwent a complete restructuring. Roger and Helen were dismissed, and legal proceedings were initiated. The news leaked to the press, and Brandon had to manage the image crisis while keeping the company running. They were difficult weeks of endless meetings, legal agreements, and rebuilding trust with investors and partners. But amidst the chaos, something began to change in Brandon. He started to listen more, to ask more, to be more present. He began to have lunch with different teams, getting to know people whose names were previously just signatures on reports. And he discovered a company far richer and more complex than he had imagined. There were stories there, dreams, families, entire lives dedicated to that place. Jasmine observed everything with her ever-watchful eyes. She saw Brandon changing, becoming more human, more accessible, and she felt proud to have been in some way a catalyst for this transformation. But she also carried the weight of having unmasked the betrayals. Was she responsible for destroying careers? One Saturday afternoon, Brandon invited her for coffee. Sitting in a charming cafe in Notting Hill, far from the corporate environment, he looked at this extraordinary girl and said something that needed to be said. "Jasmine, you saved this company twice. First from the attack, then from the internal betrayal. But I want you to know something. None of this is your responsibility. You're a child. You should be a child. You should play, study things other than code, have friends, live your life." Jasmine stirred her hot chocolate, thoughtful. "I know I'm different, Mr. Alistair. The other girls don't understand what I like, and that's okay. I'm happy in my own way. But thank you for caring." Brandon smiled tenderly. "You remind me why I'm doing all this. It's not for the numbers or the prestige. It's to create something that makes a difference in people's lives, something that gives opportunities to those who deserve them, like you." As they drove home, Brandon looked out at London and thought about everything that had happened in recent weeks. He had almost lost everything, discovered painful betrayals, faced uncomfortable truths about himself. But he had also found something precious he thought was lost. He had found true purpose, and he had found in the unlikely figure of a 12-year-old girl a reminder that miracles exist in the most unexpected places. August brought an intense chill to London, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes people huddle inside heavy coats. But inside TechVision, the atmosphere was one of rebuilding and renewal. After the departure of Roger and Helen, Brandon promoted people from within, especially those who had shown loyalty and competence during the crisis. Richard Moore took over as Vice President of Operations, choice everyone considered fair and well-deserved. Jasmine continued her routine at the company, but now with a different maturity. The experience of discovering the betrayals had left invisible but deep marks on her spirit. She had understood, prematurely and painfully, that the adult world was complex and that people were not always what they seemed. This made her more observant, more cautious, but also more empathetic. She understood that behind every betrayal was a story of pain, frustration, and unfulfilled dreams. One Friday morning, Brandon received an unexpected call. It was Gregory, his son, asking to have lunch with him. Normally, it was Brandon who initiated contact, usually through short messages and meetings scheduled weeks in advance. For the 16-year-old to call on his own was unusual enough to make him worry. They met at a Japanese restaurant in Mayfair, a place Gregory had chosen. The boy arrived on time, his hair disheveled under a cap, headphones hanging around his neck, the typical posture of a teenager trying to seem disinterested in the world around him. But Brandon noticed something different in his son's eyes, a seriousness that wasn't usually there. "Everything okay with you, son?" Brandon asked, after they ordered their food. Gregory fiddled with his chopsticks, avoiding his father's gaze. "I saw online about what happened at your company. The news about the directors who were fired. That whole story." Brandon sighed. "It was a difficult time, but it's all sorted now." "Is it true a 12-year-old girl helped figure it all out?" Gregory finally looked at him. "I read it on a tech blog. They say she's a programming genius." Brandon felt an involuntary surge of pride. "It's true. Her name is Jasmine. She's extraordinary." "You sound more excited talking about her than when you talk about—" "Me?" Gregory blurted out, a mixture of irony and genuine hurt in his voice. The observation hit Brandon like a punch to the gut. "It's not like that, Gregory. You're my son. Nothing is more important." "Then why does it feel like there's always something more important?" Gregory leaned forward, his voice low but filled with restrained emotion. "Do you know how many of my school events you've missed? How many birthdays you spent at the office? How many times Mum cried because you promised to be there and didn't show up?" Brandon felt the words like sharp blades. He knew about all those failures, carried the guilt for each one. But hearing it from his own son with that raw and honest teenage cruelty made it all more real, more painful. "I know I've failed you a lot as a father," Brandon began, his voice trembling. "I always thought I was building a future for you, ensuring your financial security. But in the process, I lost the present. I lost you." Gregory quickly wiped his eyes, embarrassed by the tears that threatened to fall. "I don't want your money, Dad. I never did. I just wanted you to be there. In the stands at my basketball games, in the audience at the school play, on the sofa at home watching a film with me. Simple things." The sushi arrived, but neither of them had an appetite. They sat there, father and son, separated by a table and by years of accumulated absences. Brandon reached out and touched Gregory's hand, who didn't pull away. "I'm going to change, son. I promise. Not overnight, because I don't know how to do it yet. But I'm going to try. Every day, I'm going to try to be the father you deserve." Gregory nodded, still not looking directly at his father. "Mum said you've changed after that whole crisis, said you seem more human now, that you even called to ask how she is, even after the divorce." "I've learned some important things recently," Brandon admitted. "I learned that success without people to share it with means nothing, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are right in front of us and we don't see them because we're looking too far ahead." They ate their lunch, and for the first time in years they really talked, not about school or grades, not about career plans or expectations. They talked about the music Gregory liked, about his friends, about the girl he thought was pretty, but didn't have the courage to talk to. Simple, mundane, precious things. Brandon discovered he knew very little about who his son really was, and he promised himself that would change. Meanwhile, at TechVision, Jasmine was facing her own dilemmas. Her English teacher at school had suggested she participate in a special program for talented young people, which offered full scholarships to study abroad at elite schools, focused on science and technology. It was an incredible opportunity, the kind to have chance that would completely change her life, but it meant leaving the UK, leaving her mother, leaving everything she knew. Constance was torn when she found out. On one hand, she wanted her daughter to have every possible opportunity. On the other, the idea of losing her, of seeing her leave so young for a distant country, broke her mother's heart. They talked about it one rainy night, sitting on the small sofa in their flat, sharing a wool blanket. "What do you want to do, my daughter?" Constance asked, brushing a stray curl from Jasmine's face. "I don't. No, Mum, it's an amazing chance, but I'm scared. Scared of being far from you, of not fitting in, of being just another prodigy among many others. Here, I'm special. There, maybe I'll just be ordinary." Constance hugged her tightly. "You will never be ordinary, Jasmine, no matter where you are, but the decision has to be yours. I'll support whatever choice you make." Jasmine took her dilemma to Brandon a few days later. They were walking through Hyde Park on a Saturday morning, an activity that had become a ritual in recent weeks. Brandon listened attentively as she laid out her fears and hopes. "You know what the thing is, Jasmine," he said after a long silence. "There's no perfect decision. Every choice will have gains and losses. The real question is, what will you regret not doing more?" Jasmine kicked a small stone on the path, thoughtful. "I'm afraid I'll regret it either way. Regret going and feeling lost. Regret staying and wondering what it would have been like. Then maybe the answer isn't about going or staying, but about what you want to build. Do you want to build an international career, or do you want to build something here in the UK, maybe help other kids like you have the same opportunities?" Jasmine's eyes lit up. "I never thought of it that way." "You're 12 years old, Jasmine. You don't need to have all the answers right now, but you can start planting the seeds of what you want to harvest in the future." That conversation echoed in Jasmine's mind for the following days. And that's when she had an idea. A big, scary, but exciting idea. She presented it to Brandon one afternoon, bursting into his office with that typical enthusiasm he had learned to love. "What if we created a program here at Tech Vision, a program to teach programming and technology to kids from state schools, especially those who don't have the resources? We could use company spaces on weekends, bring in the best professionals as volunteer teachers, give them access to equipment. It would be like a free tech school." Brandon looked at her, this girl with shining eyes and immense dreams, and felt something expand in his chest. It was more than pride. It was recognition. Recognition that she saw something he had taken decades to see, that true success is measured by the positive impact we have on the lives around us. "That's a brilliant idea, Jasmine. Let's make it happen." In the following weeks, Brandon and Jasmine worked on the project together. He handled the administrative and financial aspects, while she designed the curriculum and the format of the classes. Richard joined the initiative, as did several other company employees who volunteered as teachers. The word spread, and soon there was a waiting list of over 200 children wanting to participate. The Tech Vision Institute for Young Talent was inaugurated on a Sunday in September, occupying 2 floors of the company building specially renovated to house-equipped classrooms, computer labs and social spaces. Jasmine insisted that the name not be a tribute to her, but something that represented the entire company and its new purpose. At the inauguration ceremony, Brandon spoke to an audience of parents, children, employees and a few journalists covering the event. He spoke about second chances, about how he almost lost everything, and how an extraordinary girl saved him not only from financial collapse, but from personal collapse. He spoke about learning to see value where he once saw only numbers, about discovering that people are the true asset of any company. "And looking at all these children here today," he continued, his voice emotional, "I see the future. I see limitless potential. I see Jasmine's in every curious little face. And our commitment is to give each one a chance to shine, regardless of where they come from or how much money their families have." The applause was warm, but Brandon only had eyes for one face in the audience. Gregory was there in the middle of the crowd, smiling with genuine pride. Beside him, Miranda was also smiling, discreetly wiping away tears. For the first time since the divorce, the three of them were in the same room without tension, united by something bigger than their past differences. After the ceremony, Gregory approached his father. "That was cool, Dad. Really. You're doing something important." Brandon hugged his son, a long, tight hug. "I'm trying to fix some mistakes. I hope it's not too late." "It's never too late," Gregory replied, and Brandon felt that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to rebuild that bridge he had let collapse. But it wasn't all celebrations. A few weeks after the Institute's inauguration, Jasmine detected new suspicious accesses on the system. This time they came from outside the country, from servers located in tax havens known for hosting questionable operations. The investigation revealed that Roger and Helen, even after being dismissed from the company, had sold information to international competitors, not just data about TechVision, but also about clients, partners, and ongoing contracts. The situation was serious. Legal proceedings were intensified, but the damage was done. Some partner companies terminated contracts upon discovering that confidential information had been compromised. TechVision's image, already tarnished by the news of the internal betrayal, suffered another blow. Nervous investors began to question the company's security. The merger with Global Tech, so celebrated months ago, began to be re-evaluated by the foreign executives. Brandon faced difficult days of tense meetings, conference calls with lawyers, and complicated conversations with worried clients. But this time he wasn't alone. He had a team around him that trusted him, that worked together for recovery. He had Richard, solid as a rock, coordinating the technical response. He had Jasmine, even so young, offering valuable insights on how to better shield the systems. And he had, for the first time in years, a renewed connection with his son. Gregory started visiting him at the company sometimes, curious about his father's work. Brandon made sure to dedicate time to the boy, showing him the operation, introducing people, explaining challenges. And he discovered that his son had an interesting eye for user interface design, something he never knew because he had never asked. One particularly difficult night, when the possibility of losing large contracts seemed imminent, Brandon was alone in his office when Jasmine appeared. She should have been at home, but she had called her mother asking to stay a little longer. She sat in the chair opposite his desk, her little feet dangling without touching the floor. "Are you going to give up, Mr. Alistair?" she asked directly. "I'm thinking about it," he admitted, too honest to lie to her. "I'm tired, Jasmine. Tired of fighting betrayals, of rebuilding what they insist on destroying. Remember when you found me that night? I could have stayed in the canteen quietly without getting involved, but I saw someone who needed help and decided to act. Not because it was easy, or because I was sure I could do it, but because it was the right thing to do." Jasmine leaned forward. "You've built something important here, not just the company, but the institute, the opportunities you're giving to so many kids. Giving up now would be betraying all of them." The girl's words hit Brandon hard. She was right. Giving up would be easy, it would even be justifiable, but it wouldn't be right. Not after everything he had learned, after all the people who now depended on him, not just for salaries, but for hope. "You're right, Jasmine. As always." Brandon smiled wearily. "We'll keep fighting, but this time not alone. This time, with all of you by my side." And that's exactly what they did. In the following weeks, TechVision implemented the most robust security measures in the British market. Jasmine led, under Richard's supervision, the creation of a monitoring system that would become a benchmark in the industry. Instead of hiding the problems, Brandon was transparent with clients and partners, showing exactly what was being done to ensure future breaches were impossible. The honesty and commitment were impressive. Some contracts were saved. New ones were signed with companies that valued transparency. Global Tech, after a detailed technical analysis of the new security measures, reaffirmed its commitment to the merger. TechVision not only survived this latest storm but emerged stronger, more respected, and at the center of it all, connecting the pieces, was Jasmine. The girl who had entered the company by chance, guided only by childish curiosity, had become an essential part of its soul. She wasn't just an employee or a protégé. She was the living reminder that transformation is possible, that miracles happen, that kindness and talent can emerge from the most unlikely places. One October afternoon, as the sun set over London, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, Brandon watched from his office. Window as the children from the institute left their classes, backpacks on, smiles on their faces, dreams in their eyes. And he wondered how he had managed to live for so long without understanding the obvious. That a true legacy is not measured in money or headlines, but in lives touched, in opportunities created, in futures enabled. Jasmine appeared beside him, following his gaze. They stood like that for a moment, in comfortable silence, watching the city that sheltered them, and that now seemed a little better because of what they were building together. "Thank you, Jasmine," Brandon said softly. "For what?" "For saving me. Not once, but several times, for reminding me of what really matters." Jasmine rested her head on his arm in an almost filial gesture. "We save each other all the time, Mr. Alistair. That's how it works when people really care about each other." And she was right, as always. December arrived in London, bringing that festive mood that transforms the city. Christmas lights adorned Regent Street, crowded shopping centres buzzed with cheerful music, and there was that collective sense of a new beginning in the air that the end of the year always brings. For Brandon Alistair, that December held a special meaning. It was the end of a year that had begun on the brink of an abyss and was ending with a complete renewal, not only of the company, but of his own soul. Tech Vision would end the year with exceptional results. The merger with Global Tech had been finalized with even better terms than originally negotiated, thanks to the reputation for security and transparency the company had earned after overcoming the crises. The Tech Vision Institute for Young Talent was already serving over 300 children and teenagers every weekend, and the initial results were impressive. Several of those children were already demonstrating technical skills that rivaled entry-level professionals, but more important than any financial figure or market recognition were the personal transformations that year had brought. Brandon looked at himself in the mirror every morning and saw a different man from the one who was about to give up on that June night. He saw someone who had learned to listen, to value, to be present. His relationship with Gregory had blossomed in a surprising way. The boy now spent several weekends with him, and they had developed their own rituals. They watched films together, cooked disastrous attempts at complicated recipes, and talked about everything and nothing. Brandon discovered that his son had a talent for drawing, a sharp sense of humor, and an artistic sensitivity he certainly hadn't inherited. And he also discovered that he was capable of being a real father, not just a financial provider. Miranda had noticed the changes. In a frank conversation they had in early December, she admitted she was proud of the man he was becoming. There was no possibility of a romantic reconciliation. That chapter was definitively closed, but they had built a respectful friendship based on their shared love for their son. Jasmine had also grown, not only in technical knowledge but in emotional maturity. She had decided not to accept the scholarship to study abroad, at least not yet. She wanted to first consolidate the institute, to help the first full class of students graduate. Constance had supported the decision, relieved to have her daughter close for a few more years, but already preparing her heart for the inevitable future departure. Because they both knew that Jasmine was destined for greater heights, and when the right time came, nothing would stop her. The girl had become a minor celebrity in the British tech world. Articles in specialized magazines highlighted her story. She was invited to give talks, and companies wanted to meet her. But Brandon and Constance carefully shielded her, ensuring that fame did not steal her childhood. Jasmine might be a prodigy, but she was a child first and foremost, and deserved to be treated as such. In the first week of December, something unexpected happened. Global Tech International, impressed with the work of the Tech Vision Institute, proposed turning it into a global project. They wanted to replicate the model in 20 countries, creating a worldwide network of technological training centers for low-income youth. The investment would be $50 million over the first 3 years, with the possibility of later expansion. When Brandon received the proposal, his first reaction was euphoria. It was the ultimate recognition, the validation that the idea born from a conversation with a 12-year-old girl had the potential to change lives on a global scale. But then he did something the Brandon of a year ago would never have done. He didn't make the decision alone. He called a meeting with everyone involved in the institute, including Jasmine, Richard, the volunteer teachers, and even representatives of the students' parents. The meeting took place on a Thursday afternoon in Tech Vision's main conference room. Brandon presented the proposal in detail, the impressive numbers, the infinite possibilities. Then he opened it up for discussion. Richard was the first to speak. "It's an incredible opportunity, but we have to make sure we don't lose the essence of the project. This was born from the desire to help our local community. If it becomes a giant corporate operation, it could lose its soul." Several others agreed. There was a legitimate concern that global expansion would dilute the personal and welcoming character that made the institute special. One of the mothers timidly raised her hand. "My son has been studying here for 3 months. For the first time in his life, he wakes up excited on a Saturday morning. Do you know why? Because he knows everyone here by name. Because the teachers know he likes games and adapt the lessons to use examples from them. That can't be lost." Jasmine was quiet, listening to everything attentively. When everyone had finished speaking, she asked for the floor. "I don't think we have to choose between local and global," she began, her voice firm despite her age. "We can do both. Keep the institute here exactly as it is, as our pilot project, our home, and use Global Tech's investment to create a replicable methodology that other cities can adapt to their local realities. It wouldn't be a franchise where everyone does the same thing, but a network where each place has the autonomy to do it in the way that works best for its community." The room fell silent for a moment, processing the proposal. Then Richard began to clap, soon followed by everyone else. It was the perfect solution, balancing ambition and authenticity, growth and the preservation of values. Brandon looked at Jasmine with a mixture of admiration and tenderness. "How did you get so wise at 12 years old?" She shrugged, smiling. "I have good teachers." The modified proposal was presented to Global Tech, who accepted it readily. In the following weeks, teams worked intensely to develop the methodology, create support materials, and establish guidelines that would ensure quality without stifling local creativity. Jasmine actively participated in the entire process, and her youthful perspective brought valuable insights that adults, however experienced, simply couldn't see. But amidst all these achievements and celebrations, Brandon carried a restlessness. He felt there was something important he needed to do, a debt he needed to pay. On a Saturday morning, 2 weeks before Christmas, he asked Jasmine and Constance to come to the company. When they arrived, Brandon took them to a room on the 23rd floor that had been locked for months. When he opened the door, the two were met with something unexpected. The room had been completely transformed. It was no longer a cold corporate space, it was a dream studio for any young person passionate about technology. There were state-of-the-art workstations, giant screens, virtual reality equipment, educational robots, 3D printers, and a complete library of books on programming, artificial intelligence, design, and innovation. On the walls were posters with inspiring quotes from great scientists and inventors, and on a golden plaque above the door was engraved, "The Jasmine Sanders Innovation Center." The girl stood frozen at the entrance, her eyes wide, trying to process what she was seeing. Constance brought her hands to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. Brandon knelt in front of Jasmine, bringing himself to her eye level, as he had on that first night 6 months ago. "Jasmine, you saved much more than my company. You saved me. You taught me to see what really matters. You reminded me that talent has no fixed address and that kindness is the most valuable currency there is. This space is yours. To create, to invent, to dream without limits. And when you grow up and fly high, as I know you will, this place will be here, reminding all of us where the miracle began." Jasmine threw herself into Brandon's arms, hugging him tightly. She was crying and laughing. At the same time, conflicting emotions mixing in a storm of pure feelings. Constance joined the hug, enveloping them both, and for a long moment, They stayed like that, united by a genuine affection that transcended any classification or label. When they finally separated, Jasmine explored every corner of her new space with the enchantment of a child in a toy shop. She tested equipment, browsed books, tried out virtual reality. Brandon and Constance watched her, sharing knowing smiles. "You've done a beautiful thing, Brandon," Constance said softly. "Not just this, but everything. The way you welcomed my daughter. How you believed in her when you had every reason to doubt. You've changed our lives." "You too changed mine," Brandon replied with total sincerity. "I was lost, Constance. I had everything, and I had nothing. Jasmine showed me the way back to what really matters." That evening, TechVision held its end-of-year party, but it wasn't the formal corporate celebration of previous years. It was a real party, with families, children, live music, and homemade food brought by the employees themselves. The atmosphere was one of community, of belonging. It was the kind of environment Brandon had always deemed inappropriate for a serious company, but which he now recognized as essential for a human one. Gregory was there, mingling and talking to the children from the Institute about game design. Miranda had also attended, curious to meet the famous Jasmine, whom her son couldn't stop talking about. When the two met, there was an instant connection. Miranda saw in Jasmine the creativity and passion she had always wished Brandon would value, and Jasmine saw in Miranda a warm, motherly figure, genuinely interested in her well-being. At the height of the party, Brandon asked for everyone's attention. There was something he wanted to share. The room fell silent. Faces turned towards him. He had no prepared speech, which for an executive accustomed to meticulously planned presentations was unusual. But he felt he needed to speak from the heart, not from a script. "Exactly 6 months ago," he began, his voice emotional, "I was on this very floor, alone, watching everything I had built crumble. I thought I had lost everything. And in a way, I had. But not in the way I imagined. I had lost my way, my values, the ability to see beyond numbers and charts." Brandon looked for Jasmine in the crowd and met her eyes. Then an extraordinary girl appeared and changed everything. She not only saved the company, she saved me. She reminded me that people are more important than profits, that kindness is worth more than any stock on the market, and that sometimes the greatest miracles come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Applause filled the room, but Brandon raised a hand, asking for one more moment. "And I want everyone here to know something. The success of this company from now on will not be measured only by our revenue or how many countries we operate in. It will be measured by how many Jasmines we can discover, how many hidden talents we can reveal, how many lives we can positively touch, because that is the true purpose of all this. That is the legacy I want to leave." The party continued late into the night, but Brandon left early. He went up to the 23rd floor and walked through the empty corridors to his office. He stopped in front of the window, in the same spot where he had stood on that terrible June night, and looked down at London below. The city twinkled with its infinite lights, each one representing a life, a story, a dream. But now, unlike that night, Brandon felt no loneliness or despair. He felt a deep and serene gratitude. Gratitude for having been so completely broken that he had to rebuild himself from scratch. Gratitude for having found in his moment of greatest fragility someone pure enough to help without expecting anything in return. Gratitude for a second chance to be a father, a leader, a human being. He heard footsteps behind him and turned. It was Jasmine, still wearing the simple dress Constance had bought especially for the party. She came and stood beside him, also looking out at the city. "Can't sleep?" Brandon asked with a smile. "I'm too happy to sleep. My head is full of ideas for the new space, things I can create, projects I can develop." Brandon chuckled softly. "You never stop, do you?" "Why would I stop? There's so much to do, so much to learn, so much to create." They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Jasmine spoke, her voice suddenly serious. "Mr. Alistair, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Jasmine. Anything." "Do you regret everything that happened this year, the attack, the betrayals, the near collapse? Brandon thought carefully before answering. 6 months ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Today, I can honestly say I don't regret it, because all of it brought me here. It brought me to you, to this transformation. Sometimes we need to lose everything to discover what really matters. Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. I think I understand. Like when my old tablet broke and I thought it was the end of the world. But it was that broken tablet that made me learn how to fix things, and that opened up a whole new world of possibilities. Exactly like that, Brandon agreed, impressed once again by the wisdom of this extraordinary child. Jasmine yawned, finally giving in to her tiredness. I think I'll go back to the party. Mum must be looking for me. Before she left, Brandon called her. Jasmine, wait. She turned, curious. I want you to know that no matter what the future brings, no matter where life takes you, you will always have a place here. Not just a physical space, but a place in the heart of this company. And in my heart. Your family now. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. You're my family too, Mr. Alistair. You and everyone here. She ran to hug him one last time before returning to the party. Brandon watched her disappear down the corridor, that small figure of immense importance, and felt his heart overflow with a happiness he hadn't experienced in years. Perhaps he had never truly experienced it. The following months brought even more transformations. The Institute's global project began to be implemented in 5 pilot cities in different countries. Jasmine traveled to some of them, always accompanied by Constance, to help train local teachers and adapt the methodology. She saw the world for the first time, experienced different cultures, but always returned to London homesick. Tech Vision continued to grow, but now with a different philosophy. Brandon implemented employee appreciation policies that became a benchmark in the market. He created internal mentoring programs, open communication channels, and spaces for talent to be recognized regardless of hierarchy. The company ceased to be just a place to work and became a community where people wanted to be. Gregory decided he wanted to pursue a career in user experience design, inspired by the work he saw at Tech Vision. Brandon fully supported him, even offering him an internship at the company when the time came. Father and son became true friends, and Brandon discovered the joy of knowing his own son as a person, not just as a parental responsibility. And Jasmine remained Jasmine. At 13, she had already developed 3 educational apps that were adopted by state schools across the UK. At 14, she gave a talk at an international technology conference that went viral on the internet, inspiring millions of young people around the world. But she never lost that humble and genuine essence that made her special. She continued to live in the same flat with Constance, continued to attend her state school, and continued to be the same girl with a huge heart who one day decided to ask a downcast stranger if she could help. Years later, when journalists asked Brandon about the decisive moment that transformed Tech Vision and his own life, he always told the same story. The story of a June night, of absolute despair, of red alerts flashing like open wounds, and of a girl with a pink hoodie and an old tablet who brought not only technical solutions but human redemption. Because in the end, Brandon learned that companies are built by people, not algorithms, that success without purpose is just empty numbers on a spreadsheet, that sometimes losing everything is necessary to find what really matters, and that the greatest miracles do not come with trumpets and spotlights, but with light footsteps in the corridor, with curious eyes, with generous hearts willing to ask, even of a complete stranger, a simple and powerful question: can I help? And that question, asked on an unlikely night by an extraordinary girl, would echo through the corridors of Tech Vision forever. Not as a corporate policy or a marketing slogan, but as a permanent reminder that genuine transformation begins when we look beyond ourselves, when we see value where others see invisibility, when we let go of the arrogance of knowledge to embrace the humility of learning from those we least expect. London continued to pulse outside, a city of contrasts and contradictions, of struggles and dreams. And somewhere in this immense metropolis, there were certainly other Jasmines just waiting for an opportunity, for a watchful eye, for someone willing to believe, and thanks to what a girl and a businessman built together, From a terrible night that turned into an unlikely miracle, more and more of these jasmines were being discovered, nurtured, and celebrated. Because in the end, it's not technologies that change the world, it's people. It always has been, it always will be. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Brandon and Jasmine has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of new beginnings, forgiveness, and transformation, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any stories. Tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most, if you identified with Brandon, with Jasmine, or with any special message this narrative brought to your life. Every day we bring intense and inspiring stories like this one, which reveal the deepest and most sensitive side of the human soul, reminding us that it's never too late to start over and that miracles happen when we open our hearts. We'll be waiting for you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions. Until then, always remember, sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, and a simple act, self-kindness, can change lives forever.